There's a quiet moment in life when a person begins to realize that something isn't quite right. They follow the script they've always been told is correct. They study, work, seek stability, chase recognition, try to build something solid, but at some point an uncomfortable question arises that no one taught them how to answer. What's the point of all this? It's not a question that appears in moments of failure. Often it arises precisely when things seem to be working. When the routine is organized, when the goals are clear, when life seems to be going as expected. Yet inside something starts to feel strange, as if there's a feeling that all this effort is being invested in something that's slipping through their fingers. And this feeling isn't new. Thousands of years ago, one of the most powerful, rich, and respected men of his time arrived at exactly the same point. Surrounded by glory, wisdom, and achievements, he began his reflection with a phrase that echoes to this day as a shock of lucidity: vanity of vanities, all is vanity. This phrase, which opens the Book of Ecclesiastes, is not merely a religious expression or a pessimistic commentary on life. It is a brutal diagnosis of how human beings construct their expectations about the world. The word used in the original Hebrew text is hebel, which can be translated as vapor, mist, something that appears for an instant and then disappears. Imagine trying to hold vapor in your hands. No matter how much you try to squeeze or control it, it always escapes. This is exactly the image the author uses to describe much of what we pursue throughout life: success, recognition, wealth, power, pleasure, knowledge. Things that seem extremely solid while we are chasing after them, but which, when finally achieved, reveal a much more fragile nature than we imagined. The shock of Ecclesiastes is not in affirming that these things exist, but in revealing that none of them can sustain the weight of the meaning we try to place upon them. The most interesting thing is that this reflection does not come from someone who has failed to achieve these things. On the contrary, the author traditionally associated with Ecclesiastes is Solomon, a king known in biblical tradition for his extraordinary wisdom, unparalleled wealth, and political power. He doesn't speak as someone speculating about life. He speaks as someone who experienced virtually every possibility the world could offer: pleasure, luxury, knowledge, grand constructions, influence over entire nations. If anyone could claim that fulfillment lies in external achievements, it would be him. However, his conclusion follows a completely different direction. After observing all that he has built, all that he has accumulated, and all that he has experienced, he arrives at an uncomfortable realization. The ladder to success may be long, difficult, and full of rewards, but reaching the top doesn't mean finding what one expected to find. This realization directly addresses one of the most common illusions of modern life: the idea that the next goal will finally bring a sense of completeness. Many people live with the impression that life is always about to truly begin. When the next paycheck comes, when the next promotion happens, when the next project succeeds, when the next phase arrives. The human mind gets used to living in anticipation mode, always looking ahead, waiting for the next milestone to bring the satisfaction that hasn't yet appeared. The problem is that this mechanism creates a silent cycle. Each achievement generates a small moment of euphoria, but soon after, the mind projects a new goal on the horizon, and the process begins again. Work harder, conquer more, achieve more. It's a race that seems logical, but often doesn't lead to the kind of fulfillment we imagined when we started. Ecclesiastes observes this behavior with almost disconcerting clarity. The text describes someone who decided to test this path to the limit, someone who immersed themselves in the pleasures of life, hoping to find lasting satisfaction. Parties, wine, entertainment, comfort, beauty, abundance. For a while, these experiences seem to offer exactly what they promise. They distract, relieve, stimulate. But as time passes, something begins to change. The intensity decreases, the charm weakens, and what once seemed extraordinary becomes just another common experience. The human mind has a curious characteristic. It adapts quickly to any kind of stimulus. What once seemed incredible becomes normal. What once caused excitement now seems like just part of the routine. And so, the pleasure that promised to fill the void ends up becoming just another element within it. But Solomon didn't limit himself to exploring pleasure. Ecclesiastes also embarked on another highly respected pursuit throughout human history: the pursuit of knowledge, study, reflection, investigation, understanding of the world. In theory, a deep understanding of reality should bring a sense of security or clarity. However, Ecclesiastes presents a surprising observation. Increasing knowledge often means also increasing the perception of life's imperfections. The more attentively one observes reality, the more one perceives the injustices that exist in the world, the contradictions that permeate human experience, and the fragility of the structures we try to build. Knowledge illuminates, but it also exposes. It removes comfortable illusions. It shows that many things that seem solid are, in fact, extremely unstable. This process can generate a strange feeling, a kind of silent maturity that is not necessarily joyful, but profoundly honest. The person begins to realize that many social narratives are simplifications of reality. The idea that effort always generates reward, the belief that talent is always recognized, the expectation that justice always prevails. In practice, life proves to be much more unpredictable. The fastest doesn't always win the race, not always does the strongest win the battle, not always does the wisest prosper. Time and chance intersect with everyone's history. This realization can be uncomfortable, but it also brings a kind of clarity that completely changes how someone views their own choices. Another central point of Ecclesiastes' reflection involves something that occupies most people's days: work. Building something, producing, achieving results, accumulating resources, creating stability. In principle, all of this seems perfectly reasonable. Work can generate progress, comfort, and opportunities. The problem arises when it becomes someone's main source of identity, when a person begins to measure the value of their own life only by the results they are able to produce. Solomon observes that many people dedicate entire decades to building assets, projects, or businesses, believing that this will bring lasting security. However, there is a detail that is rarely considered in sufficient depth. No one controls the final destiny of what they build. Time passes, circumstances change, and eventually everything that someone has spent a lifetime building can fall into hands that do not share the same care or purpose. This perception is not presented in Ecclesiastes as an invitation to discouragement. On the contrary, the text's objective seems to be to remove illusions so that life can be lived with more awareness. When a person realizes that wealth, pleasure, knowledge, and work alone cannot sustain the weight of the meaning of existence, something interesting happens. They begin to look at life in a different way. Instead of trying to transform fleeting things into permanent sources of identity, the possibility arises of developing a more balanced relationship with them. Work ceases to be an obsession and becomes a tool. Pleasure ceases to be a refuge and becomes merely a moment of celebration. Knowledge ceases to be a shield against reality and becomes a way to better understand the world. And it is precisely at this point that Ecclesiastes presents one of the most powerful ideas in the entire book. Life is transient, but that doesn't mean it's insignificant. On the contrary, the awareness that time is limited can completely transform the way someone chooses to live. When a person believes there will always be more time in the future, they tend to postpone important decisions, neglect relationships, and treat each day as a given. But when there is clarity about the fragility of existence, each choice takes on a different weight. Small experiences become more valuable. Human relationships become more important. The present ceases to be merely a step between goals and becomes recognized as the very space where life happens.